The wolves came at twilight, when the desert cold turned bone-deep and the shadows stretched long across the Arizona basin. Their howls pierced the silence like broken glass scraping against stone, hungry, desperate, relentless. And somewhere in that wilderness, a woman was running for her life. His name was Jacob Morrison, a man who'd learned to live with ghosts, the kind of man who spoke more to his horse than to people, who measured his days not in hours but in the distance between sunrise and the moment he could finally close his eyes without seeing their faces. His wife, his daughter, gone 3 winters now, taken by fever in a single brutal week that had carved out everything inside him and left only the shell. The cabin he'd built sat tucked against the red rock cliffs like a secret the mountain was keeping, miles from the nearest settlement, miles from memory, miles from anything that reminded him he was still supposed to be alive. He'd chosen isolation the way other men chose whiskey, as the only medicine strong enough to numb what couldn't be healed. That evening, October, when the air smelled of sage and coming snow, Jacob was checking his traps along the ridgeline. The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, turning the sky the color of old copper. His horse, a gruler mare named Slate, suddenly went rigid beneath him, ears swiveling forward like compass needles finding true north. Then he heard it. The wolves, not the distant song they sang to the moon, but the hunting cry, the sound that meant they'd found prey. He should have turned back, should have ridden toward the cabin and bolted the door and let nature take its course the way it always did in this unforgiving country. The wilderness had its own rules, its own justice, and a wise man didn't interfere. But something in those howls, something in the pitch of them, made his hands tighten on the reins, made his heels press into Slate's flanks, made him ride toward the sound instead of away from it, through the pinyon pines and over a dry wash, following the crescendo of snarls and snaps that meant the pack had closed in. And then he saw her. A young woman, Apache, he knew instantly from the doe-skin dress and the way her black hair was bound with red cloth, backed against a boulder with nothing but a broken branch in her trembling hands. 6 wolves circling, maybe 7, their ribs showing through mangy fur, starving, the kind of hungry that made animals forget caution. Jacob didn't think. Thinking was a luxury for men who still believed their choices mattered. He drew his rifle from the saddle scabbard, fired once into the air. The crack of gunpowder split the twilight. 3 wolves scattered, 2 held their ground. The largest, a grey patriarch with scars across its muzzle, turned those yellow eyes on Jacob like he was the intruder here, like he was the one who didn't belong. He fired again. Closer this time. The bullet kicked up dirt 6 inches from the grey's paws. That did it. The pack melted back into the shadows like smoke, gone as quickly as they'd come, leaving only the smell of fear and the sound of the woman's ragged breathing echoing off the rocks. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jacob kept the rifle trained on the tree line. The woman kept her back pressed against the stone. Her eyes, dark as midnight and just as deep, locked on his face with an expression he couldn't read. Not gratitude, not fear exactly, something harder, something that looked almost like defiance. Then her knees buckled, the branch fell from her fingers. She caught herself against the boulder, but he could see the blood now, spreading dark across the buckskin at her thigh where wolf teeth had found purchase. Not a killing wound, but bad enough. Bad enough that she'd be dead by morning if infection set in, and out here, infection was as certain as the sunrise. Jacob dismounted slowly, kept his movements careful. He'd lived near the Apache long enough to know how this looked. A white man, alone, armed, approaching an Apache woman in the wilderness. The kind of situation that started wars. The kind of moment that could get a man killed 6 different ways before he even opened his mouth. But she was bleeding, and the wolves would come back once full dark fell, and despite everything, despite the part of him that wanted to feel nothing ever again, He couldn't ride away. He spoke in the few Apache words he'd learned from trading, short phrases, halting, help, safe, cabin. She stared at him like she was weighing his soul on scales only she could see. Then she spoke, in English, clear as church bells, and her voice was steady despite the pain. "If you mean to harm me, the wolves would have been kinder." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement, a challenge, a woman deciding her own fate even as blood ran down her leg. "I mean to keep you alive," Jacob said quietly. "Nothing more, nothing less." She studied him another heartbeat, then nodded once, sharp, decisive, like she'd just made a deal with the devil and knew exactly what she was gambling. He helped her onto Slate, the mare standing steady as stone, and they rode back toward the cabin as the first stars began to punch through the darkening sky. Behind them, in the distance, the wolves started singing again, a sound like hunger given voice, a sound like the wilderness reminding them both that mercy was a luxury that nature never promised to honor. Her name, she told him as they rode, was Nalani. It meant serenity of the heavens in her language, though there was nothing serene about the way she gripped the saddle horn, nothing heavenly about the white-knuckled pain etched across her face. She'd been traveling for 2 days, she said, running from her village, from a marriage her family had arranged to a warrior she'd never loved, from a future written by hands other than her own. Jacob didn't ask more, didn't probe. He understood running, understood the weight of a life you couldn't carry anymore. They rode in silence, two strangers bound by chance and blood and the thin thread of survival. The cabin appeared ahead, squat and solid against the cliff face. Smoke curled from the chimney where he'd left the morning fire banked. It looked lonely out here, but lonely was exactly what he'd wanted, what he'd needed. He helped her inside, settled her on the narrow bed, the same bed where his daughter used to sleep, though he tried not to think about that. Lit the lamps, stoked the fire until it roared, then tended to her wound with the careful precision of a man who'd done this before, who'd wrapped bandages around bodies he loved and watched them die anyway. The wolf bite was deep, ragged, but clean. No poison in it yet. Nalani didn't cry out, didn't flinch, just watched him work with those midnight eyes and breathed through clenched teeth. "You've done this before," she said. Not a question, an observation. Jacob didn't answer, didn't need to. The scars on his hands told their own story. The emptiness in his face told the rest. When he finished, when the wound was cleaned and wrapped, and she'd drunk the bitter willow bark tea he'd brewed for the pain, he moved to the far corner of the cabin, put his bedroll on the floor, put distance between them. "You'll sleep there," he said, nodding to the bed. "I'll sleep here. Doors barred. Wolves won't get in. Come morning, when you're stronger, you can decide where you want to go." She nodded, said nothing. He turned down the lamps until only firelight remained, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant echo of howls. The wolves were still out there, hungry, waiting. Jacob lay down on the hard floor and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. It never did anymore. And tonight, with a stranger bleeding in his dead daughter's bed, it felt further away than ever. In the darkness, he heard her voice, soft, careful. "Why did you help me?" Jacob was quiet so long she probably thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he answered, "Because somebody should have helped them, and nobody did." He didn't explain who them was. Didn't have to. The weight of those words, the grief folded inside them, said everything. Nalani was silent after that. But in the firelight, if Jacob had been looking, he would have seen something shift in her expression, something like recognition, like she'd just met another soul who understood what it meant to carry ghosts. The fire burned low, the night stretched long, and in that small cabin pressed against the wilderness, two broken people began the strange, uncertain work of simply surviving until morning. Morning came hard to the Arizona high country. Not gentle, not gradual, just a sudden blade of sunlight cutting through the window and exposing everything the darkness had hidden. Jacob woke to the sound of movement, boots on wood, the scrape of a chair, and his hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt before his eyes even opened. Old habits, the kind that kept men alive out here. But it was only Nalani, standing at the window despite the bandaged leg, despite the pain that must have been singing through her bones like a badly tuned violin. She was watching the sunrise with the intensity of someone memorizing it, like she wasn't sure how many more she'd get to see. When she heard him stir, she turned. "Your land," she said quietly, "is beautiful in the morning light." Jacob grunted, stood, moved to stoke the fire. "It's not mine," he muttered. "Nobody owns this country. We just borrow it until it decides it's done with us." He made coffee, strong coffee, the kind that could strip rust off iron and wake the dead. Nalani accepted a cup with both hands, wrapping her fingers around the warmth like it was something precious. They drank in silence, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Two people who'd both learned that words were usually just ways to avoid saying what really mattered. Outside, Slate whinnied from the small corral. Jacob grabbed his coat. "I need to tend the animals," he said. "Check your bandage before I go. Make sure it's not—" He trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. Make sure death wasn't setting in. She let him examine the wound. It was angry, red and swollen at the edges, but not the kind of angry that meant corruption. Not yet. Jacob changed the dressing, applied more of the poultice he'd made from yarrow and sage. His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size. Nalani noticed. "You were a father," she said suddenly. Not a question, a knowing. Jacob's hands stilled, his jaw tightened. "What makes you say that?" She met his eyes. "The way you touch the bandage. Like you're afraid of causing pain, but more afraid of missing something that might spread. Only parents learn that kind of fear." He stood abruptly, moved to the door without answering, but she'd struck something true, and they both felt it hanging in the air like smoke. He spent the morning doing what needed doing, fed Slate, checked the snares, hauled water from the spring, physical work, the kind that kept a man's hands busy so his mind couldn't wander down roads that led nowhere good. But even as he worked, he found himself glancing back at the cabin, making sure smoke still rose from the chimney, making sure something was still alive in there. When he returned, Nalani had cleaned the breakfast dishes, had swept the floor, had made herself useful despite the leg that must have been screaming. Jacob frowned. "You should be resting." She shook her head. "I don't rest well. Never have." She paused. "My grandmother used to say stillness was where the demons caught you. Better to keep moving. Keep your hands busy. Keep the darkness at bay." Jacob understood that too. More than he wanted to admit, he'd spent 3 years keeping busy, cutting wood, building fences, repairing things that didn't need repair, anything to avoid the quiet where memory lived. They fell into an unspoken routine over the next days. Jacob would work outside. Nalani would tend the cabin. Neither acknowledged what they were doing. This strange domestic dance between two people who'd both sworn off connection. But it happened anyway, the way ice melts in spring, inevitable, unstoppable. She told him more about why she'd run, not all at once, in pieces. Like broken pottery she was trying to reassemble. Her family had promised her to Takoda, a warrior respected in the tribe but cruel in private ways that didn't show in daylight. She'd refused, defied her father, the elder who'd never been defied before, dishonored the arrangement. So she'd fled, knowing that to return meant surrendering her will, herself, everything that made her Nalani and not just a woman-shaped thing for others to own. "They'll come looking," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "My father, my brothers, Takoda, they won't let this stand. In my tribe, a broken promise is a broken bond, and broken bonds—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. Jacob fed another log to the flames. "How long do we have?" She shrugged. "Days, maybe a week. I covered my trail well, but they're hunters. They'll find the wolf tracks, find the blood, find their way here." She looked at him steadily. "When they come, you should tell them I forced you. Tell them I held a knife to your throat. Tell them whatever you need to so they don't—" "No!" Jacob's voice was flat, final. "I don't lie, not about things that matter." Nalani studied him. "You'd risk war with the Apache for a stranger." He met her eyes. "I'd risk war for the truth, which is that you chose, that you're not property, that you're a person who gets to decide her own fate." He paused. "Not enough people defended that idea for the ones I loved. Maybe it matters if someone does it for you." Something shifted in that moment. Some invisible wall between them developed a crack. Nalani looked away first, blinked hard. When she spoke again, her voice was rougher. "Your family, the ones you lost, tell me about them." Jacob's first instinct was to refuse, to lock that door the way he'd locked it for 3 years. But something about the firelight, something about the way she'd shared her truth, made him speak. "Margaret," he said slowly, like the name was something fragile. "My wife, red hair, laughed like water over stones. Easy, natural. She could find joy in anything. A sunrise, a good meal, the way the wind sounded through the pines." He paused, swallowed. "And Lily, our daughter, 8 years old. She had her mother's laugh, had this way of making up stories about everything. The horses, the clouds, the stars. She'd tell me every night before bed that the stars were souls waiting to be born, and that's why they were so bright." His voice cracked. He stopped, stared into the fire like he could find them there. "Fever came in January. Started with Margaret. I rode 2 days to fetch a doctor, but the snow was too deep. By the time I got back, Lily had it too. They died within hours of each other. Margaret first, then Lily. Lily kept asking for her mama, kept saying she was cold. And I held her and kept the fire going and did everything I could think of. But she just kept getting colder." The silence that followed was immense, cavernous. Nalani didn't offer empty comfort, didn't say it would be all right, or that time heals, or any of the useless things people said. She just sat with him in that grief, let it exist. Finally she spoke. "My younger sister drowned when I was 12, in the river. I was supposed to be watching her. I turned my back for one moment, and she was gone. They never blamed me aloud, but I blamed myself. Every day since." Jacob looked at her, really looked, saw the weight she carried, the way guilt had carved itself into her bones the same way it had carved itself into his. "It wasn't your fault," he said. She gave a bitter smile. "That's what everyone says. But fault doesn't care about truth. Fault is what you carry regardless." They sat with that. 2 people marked by loss. 2 people who understood that survival wasn't victory. It was just what happened when you didn't have the courage to stop. But something else was happening too. Something neither of them had names for yet. In the sharing of wounds, in the honesty of their brokenness, they were building something. Not healing exactly, but connection. The kind that happens when 2 people stop pretending they're whole and just admit they're fragments trying to hold shape. The days bled into each other. Nalani's leg improved. The swelling went down. The redness faded. She could walk without limping, could move without wincing, which meant she was well enough to leave. Neither of them mentioned it, but it hung in the air like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Every morning Jacob woke expecting to find her gone. Every evening Nalani prepared herself to say goodbye, but the words never came. The leaving never happened. Instead, they just existed together in that small cabin pressed against the mountains, trading stories, trading silences, trading the weight of their ghosts. Until the morning Jacob went to check the traps and came back to find Nalani standing outside, staring down the trail that led away from the cabin. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking. "What is it?" he asked. She pointed. There, in the dust. Footprints. Many of them. Fresh, leading toward the cabin like a noose tightening. "They're here," she whispered. "My people. They found me." And just like that, the borrowed time they'd been living on ran out. They came at noon, when the sun was high and shadows were short and there was nowhere to hide from what was coming. Jacob saw them first, 5 riders cresting the ridge above the cabin, silhouettes against the burning sky, Apache warriors on painted horses, moving with the kind of purpose that meant this wasn't a visit, this was a reckoning. Nalani stood beside him in the doorway. Her face was carved from stone, but her hands were trembling. "The one in front," she said quietly. "That's my father, Ahiga. It means he fights, and he does. All his life he's fought. For our land, for our people, for our way of life. And now—" She swallowed. "Now he'll fight for his honor, which means bringing me back, which means—" She looked at Jacob. "You should go inside. Bolt the door. Pretend you never saw me. There's still time for you to—" "No." Jacob's voice was steady, certain. He stepped forward, placed himself between Nalani and the approaching riders. It wasn't a tactical decision, wasn't something he'd thought through. It was just instinct. The same instinct that had made him ride toward the wolves instead of away. The same instinct that had kept him checking on her bandage every morning. The same instinct that had cracked open the door he'd locked around his heart. She wasn't leaving, not like this, not as property being reclaimed. The riders stopped 20 feet from the cabin, close enough to make their intentions clear, far enough to show they'd come to talk first. Ahiga dismounted slowly. He was tall, weathered, with silver threading through his black braids and scars, mapping his arms like treaties written in flesh. His eyes went to Nalani first, checking for injury, for harm. And something in them softened. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Jacob to see the father beneath the warrior. Then those eyes moved to Jacob and hardened again, became flint, became judgment. Ahiga spoke in Apache, fluid, forceful, commanding. Jacob didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the accusation buried in it. Nalani answered in the same language, her voice rising, defiant. The argument went back and forth, sharp, heated. The other warriors shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward weapons but not drawing. Not yet. Finally, Ahiga turned to Jacob, spoke in heavily accented English. "You white man, you take my daughter, you dishonor my family, you make me look weak before my people." It wasn't a question, it was an indictment. Jacob met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't take anyone," he said quietly. "I found her bleeding and dying in the wilderness. I gave her shelter. That's all I did. She's free to go. Always has been. But she's also free to stay. That's her choice. Not mine. Not yours." Ahiga's jaw tightened. "She is my daughter. She is promised to Takoda. This is our way, our law. You do not understand our—" "I understand slavery," Jacob cut him off. His voice was still quiet, but it had steel in it now. "I understand claiming ownership over another person's life. I don't care if you call it tradition or law or honor. A cage is still a cage, even if you build it out of words instead of iron." The tension spiked. One of the warriors, younger, with war paint still fresh on his face, moved his hand to his knife. But Ahiga raised a palm, stopped him. The elder studied Jacob with new intensity, like he was seeing him for the first time. Not as a white man, not as an enemy, but as something more complicated, something that didn't fit into the simple boxes he'd built in his mind. "You have strong words," Ahiga said slowly, "but words are easy. What will you do when Takoda comes? He is war chief, he is angry, he will not talk. He will come with many warriors. Will you fight them all for a woman you barely know?" It was a fair question, a brutal one. Jacob had no army, no tribe, no backup, just himself. One man against how many? And for what? For a woman he'd known barely 2 weeks, for a principle that had failed him when it mattered most? But before he could answer, Nalani stepped forward, placed herself between her father and Jacob. When she spoke, her voice carried across the canyon like a bell. "Enough," she said in English, making sure Jacob understood, making sure everyone did. "Father, I love you, I honor you, but I will not marry Takoda. I will not be given like a horse or a blanket to strengthen alliances I didn't choose. I am my own person, and I choose to stay here." Ahiga's face twisted, pain and fury warring for dominance. "You shame me," he said hoarsely. "You shame our family. You shame—" "I shame no one," Nalani cut across him. Her eyes were blazing now, fierce, uncompromising. "I honor you by being honest, by refusing to lie about who I am and what I want. Would you rather I married Takoda and hated you for it, grew bitter and poisoned our family from within? Is that the honor you want?" The silence that followed was like the moment before lightning strikes, charged, dangerous. Ahiga looked at his daughter, really looked, saw the woman she'd become, saw the will in her, the fire, the same fire he'd carried all his life when fighting for what he believed. And maybe he saw that fighting her would be like fighting himself, that breaking her would be breaking the very spirit he'd raised her to have. But before he could respond, another sound rolled across the canyon. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, coming fast. Everyone turned, saw the second group of riders approaching from the east. 10 warriors, led by a man painted for war. Takoda. His face was a mask of rage. Even from a distance, Jacob could feel the violence radiating off him like heat from a forge. This wasn't a man who'd come to negotiate. This was a man who'd come to take what he believed was his. Ahiga cursed under his breath, turned to his men, spoke rapidly in Apache. They moved to form a line between the cabin and the approaching warriors, not defending Jacob exactly, but not attacking him either, creating a buffer, buying time. Ahiga looked at Jacob, and in that look there was something like respect, maybe even understanding. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Take my daughter, bar the door. What happens next?" He paused. "What happens next is between my people. You have done enough." But Jacob didn't move. "If they come for her, they come through me." Ahiga shook his head. "You will die. You understand this? Takoda will kill you. I might not be able to stop it even if I wanted to." Jacob's voice was steady. "Then I die. I've been dead for 3 years anyway. Might as well mean something." Something flickered in Ahiga's eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, like he was seeing a kindred spirit, a man who'd chosen his hill to die on, right or wrong, smart or foolish, but chosen, with intention, with meaning. The old warrior nodded once, slowly, then turned to face Takoda's approaching war party, drew himself up to full height, prepared to defend a white man's cabin for reasons that probably didn't make sense even to him. Takoda and his warriors thundered up in a cloud of dust and fury. The war chief vaulted from his horse before it even fully stopped. His hand was already on his tomahawk. His eyes were wild, locked on the cabin, on Nalani, visible in the doorway. "Mine!" he roared in English, making sure Jacob understood. "She is mine. You have no right." She is no one's. Ahiga stepped into his path. And you forget yourself, Takoda. I am still elder here. You will... Elder, Takoda spat the word like poison. You are weak. You let a white man steal your daughter and you stand here talking? While our enemies laugh? While our warriors question your strength? He pushed past Ahiga, moved toward the cabin. I will take what is mine, and I will kill anyone who... The rifle shot cracked across the canyon like a thunderclap, kicked up dirt 3 feet in front of Takoda's boots. He froze, looked up, saw Jacob on the cabin's roof, the rifle already reloaded, aimed, steady. Next one goes through your chest, Jacob called down. His voice was calm, factual, not a threat, a promise. Takoda snarled, started to move again. Another shot, this one closer, 6 inches from his foot. I said next one, Jacob repeated. I don't miss twice. For a long moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Takoda could charge, could start a fight that would end with blood soaking into the Arizona dust, could ignite a war between his people and what? One man? One broken cowboy with nothing left to lose? But maybe that was exactly what made him dangerous. A man with nothing to lose. A man who'd already died inside. Who was just moving pieces around until the game finally ended. Takoda seemed to realize it, seemed to see his own death in Jacob's eyes. And maybe he wasn't quite ready for it. Not yet, not today. He stepped back, slowly, pointed at Nalani. You were promised to me, he hissed. That promise will stand. One way or another. You will be mine. No, Nalani's voice rang out clear and cold. I will not. And if you come here again, if you threaten this man again, I will tell the tribe everything, every cruelty, every time you struck your last wife, every time you proved yourself to be the coward hiding behind warrior's paint. I will strip away your mask and let everyone see what I see. A small man, desperate for power because he has no real strength. The words hit like arrows. Takoda's face went purple. His hand went to his knife, but Ahiga stepped between them again. And this time his own knife was drawn, pointed at Takoda. She has spoken, the elder said quietly, and I stand with her words. The marriage is void. Return to the village. Tell the council what you will, but this matter is finished. The 2 men stared at each other, wills colliding. Finally, Takoda spat in the dirt, mounted his horse. His warriors followed suit. As they rode away, he turned back once. This is not over, he called. Not while I still breathe. Then they were gone. Dust settling, silence returning. Jacob climbed down from the roof. Nalani rushed to him, checking for injuries even though he hadn't been touched. Ahiga watched them, saw the way she moved toward him, the way Jacob's hand found her shoulder, the connection that had formed between them. He sighed, looked suddenly old, tired. I cannot protect you anymore, he told his daughter in Apache. Then, in English for Jacob's sake, if you stay here, you are no longer of my tribe, you understand? I cannot shield you from Takoda, cannot shield him. He looked at Jacob. You have made enemies today, white man. Dangerous enemies. Jacob nodded. I've made enemies before. I'm still here. Ahiga almost smiled, almost. You are brave or foolish. I have not decided which. He remounted his horse. His warriors did the same, but before leaving he looked at Nalani one last time, and his voice was softer, sadder. I hope you find what you are looking for, daughter. I hope he is worth what you have given up. Then they too rode away, leaving Jacob and Nalani standing alone in the fading afternoon light, knowing that everything had changed, that the borrowed time was over, that now they would face whatever came next together. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when the moon was dark and the stars offered barely enough light to see shadows moving against darker shadows. They came silent, no war cries, no horses, just men on foot, 10, maybe 12, moving like wolves through the pines toward the cabin where Jacob and Nalani slept. But Jacob hadn't survived 3 years in the wilderness by being careless. He'd prepared, strung tripwires in the trees, scattered dry branches in strategic paths so nothing could approach without noise, built firing positions in the rocks above the cabin, stockpiled ammunition, water, food, turned the small homestead into something resembling a fort, because had known that Dakota's pride wouldn't let this go, that the war chief would come, and that when he did, it would be with murder in his heart. The first tripwire sang in the darkness, a small bell Jacob had rigged, borrowed from Slate's old tack, chiming once in the night. Then silence. Jacob's eyes snapped open. He was up and armed in seconds, moved to the window without making a sound, saw nothing, but felt them out there, felt the weight of hostile attention the way animals feel storms coming. He touched Nalani's shoulder. She woke instantly. No confusion, no delay, just immediate awareness. The kind that came from growing up in a world where sleep was never guaranteed to be safe. "They're here," he whispered. She nodded, rose, grabbed the rifle he'd taught her to use over the past weeks. They'd practiced for this, drilled it like soldiers. She would take the west window, he'd take the east. Crossfire, overlapping fields, 2 people fighting like they were 20. It was their only chance. Outside. A twig snapped, then another. The attackers were trying to be quiet, but patience had worn thin. They were closing in, tightening the noose. Jacob waited until he could see the first silhouette against the starlight, then fired. The muzzle flash lit up the night like lightning. The silhouette dropped. Shouts erupted. The attack exploded into chaos. More figures rushed the cabin from multiple angles. Jacob fired again, worked the lever, fired. Each shot deliberate, controlled, not wasting ammunition, each bullet counting. Beside him, Nalani's rifle cracked, once, twice. She was steady, calm, like this was something she'd been born knowing how to do. Arrows thudded into the cabin walls. One shattered the western window. Glass sprayed inward. Nalani ducked, came up firing. An attacker had made it to the door, was slamming against it with something heavy. The bar across the frame groaned but held. Jacob shifted aim, fired through the door. Wood splintered. The pounding stopped. Someone screamed. For 20 minutes, the world was nothing but gunfire and smoke and the acrid smell of powder burning. Jacob's ears rang. His shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, but he kept firing, kept moving between windows, kept Nalani covered when she had to reload. They moved like one organism, like they'd been fighting together for years instead of weeks, born from necessity, from trust, from the absolute certainty that if one of them fell, the other would fall shortly after. Then a silence, sudden, complete. The attackers had pulled back, regrouping or retreating, Jacob couldn't tell which. He scanned the darkness, counted shapes on the ground. 4 bodies. Maybe more wounded dragged away, but the rest were still out there, waiting. He could feel them. "Reload," he said quietly. Nalani was already doing it, her hands steady, despite everything, despite the violence, despite the reality that she was fighting her own people, that every bullet she fired might be ending someone she'd grown up with. "Are you hurt?" Jacob asked. She shook her head, but in the dim light he saw blood on her arm. "You're bleeding." She glanced down. "Arrow grazed me. It's nothing." He wanted to check it, wanted to make sure nothing wasn't something worse. But there wasn't time. Outside, a voice called out, Dakota's voice, carrying across the darkness like a blade. "Nalani, you fight for a white man against your own blood. You are traitor. You are—" "I fight for myself," she shouted back. Her voice rang with fury, with conviction. "I fight for the right to choose my own path, and if that makes me a traitor to you, then I accept it, because your way is slavery dressed up as honor, and I will not bow to it." Dakota's response was a roar of incoherent rage. Then more arrows, more rushing feet. They'd abandoned stealth completely now. This was assault, raw, desperate, the kind of attack men made when pride mattered more than tactics. Jacob met them with bullets, Nalani with the same. The cabin became an island of fire and lead in the darkness, holding. But ammunition was finite. Jacob could feel the weight of his cartridge belt growing lighter, could hear Nalani's firing slow as her own supply dwindled. They had maybe enough for one more wave. After that, it would come down to knives and desperation. He didn't let himself think about what happened after that. The eastern window exploded inward, not from an arrow, from a body. One of Takoda's warriors had thrown himself through it, glass and wood and blood, landing inside the cabin with a knife already swinging. Jacob barely got his rifle up in time, blocked the blade, slammed the stock into the man's face. Once, twice, the warrior went down. But now they were inside. Now the sanctuary had been breached. Jacob spun, saw movement at the western window, another warrior climbing through. Nalani was there, met him with the rifle barrel like a club. The man grabbed it. They struggled. Jacob couldn't get a shot without risking hitting her. He crossed the cabin in 3 strides, grabbed the warrior by the throat, hauled him off Nalani, and threw him against the wall. The man came up with a knife, slashed at Jacob's chest. The blade caught him across the ribs, a hot line of pain that felt distant through the adrenaline. Jacob caught the warrior's wrist, twisted, bone snapped, the knife clattered away. Jacob's fist drove into the man's solar plexus, then his jaw. The warrior collapsed, stayed down. Jacob! Nalani's warning came a heartbeat too late. Something crashed into him from behind. Takoda. The war chief had come through the broken eastern window while Jacob was distracted. They went down in a tangle of limbs and rage. Takoda's hands found Jacob's throat, squeezed hard. Stars burst across Jacob's vision. He bucked, tried to throw Takoda off, but the Apache was strong, fueled by fury, by humiliation, by the need to dominate. Jacob's hands scrabbled across the floor. Found something, the fallen knife. His fingers closed around it. He drove it upward, felt it punch through cloth and skin and muscle. Takoda's eyes went wide. His grip on Jacob's throat loosened. Jacob shoved him off, rolled away gasping. Nalani was there, helping him up. The rifle in her hands aimed at Takoda where he lay bleeding on the cabin floor. But the war chief wasn't done, even wounded, even dying. He tried to rise, tried to reach for his tomahawk. "Stay down," Nalani commanded. Her voice was ice. The rifle never wavered. Takoda looked up at her, blood bubbling at his lips and in his eyes. Finally, recognition. Recognition that he'd lost, that his pride had led him here, to this floor, to this ending. He tried to speak, coughed blood instead. Then his eyes went empty, fixed on nothing. The war chief was gone. Outside. The sounds of fighting had stopped. The remaining warriors had seen their leader fall, had lost their will. The night grew quiet again, broken only by Jacob's ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire that had somehow stayed lit through everything. Jacob pressed a hand to his ribs. It came away red. Nalani saw, moved to him immediately. How bad? He looked down. The cut was long but shallow, painful but not fatal. "I'll live," he said. Tried to smile, failed. The adrenaline was fading now. Reality was crashing in. The weight of what they'd done, the bodies, the blood, the line they'd crossed that could never be uncrossed. Nalani helped him to the bed, started tending his wound with hands that were finally shaking now that the danger had passed. "We can't stay here," she said quietly. "Not now. My people, they'll come. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come. An elder's daughter, a war chief, the cost of this—" She trailed off, but Jacob understood. The cost was too high, the debt too great. They'd won the battle but guaranteed the war. He nodded. "We'll leave at first light. Head west, into the territories where— Where what? Where they could disappear. Where the past couldn't find them. Was there such a place? Nalani finished bandaging him, sat back, looked at the cabin, her cabin now too in a way, the place where they'd built something fragile and precious, and now had to abandon. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door. I'm sorry you had to—" "Stop!" Jacob caught her hand, held it. I'm not sorry for any of it." He meant it. Despite the pain, despite the blood, despite everything, he meant it, because for the first time in 3 years he'd felt alive, had felt like his choices mattered, had felt like he was someone other than a ghost haunting his own life. They sat together as dawn began to grey the eastern sky. 2 people who'd survived the night, 2 people who'd defended something worth defending, 2 people who now had to face what came next. Around them the cabin stood silent, scarred, windows broken, walls pocked with arrows and bullet holes, but standing, still standing, like them, battered but unbroken. They'd rest for a few hours, gather what they could carry, then ride, together, into an uncertain future that was somehow less frightening than certain pasts they were leaving behind. Outside, the first birds began to sing. Life returning to the canyon, indifferent to human violence, indifferent to human struggle. The sun rose, as it always did, as it always would. And Jacob Morrison, who'd thought he'd never see another sunrise that mattered, watched this one with a woman beside him who'd given him a reason to want to see the next. They rode west for 6 days, through country so harsh it seemed to resent the presence of anything living, over mountains that clawed at the sky like broken teeth, through valleys where the wind howled with voices that sounded almost human. Jacob and Nalani, 2 riders on 2 horses, carrying everything they owned in saddlebags and blanket rolls, leaving behind everything they couldn't carry, including the weight of who they'd been. Jacob had torched the cabin before they left, stood and watched it burn, not from anger, from necessity. If he left it standing, someone would come looking, would find the bodies, would follow the trail, but smoke scattered on the wind, and ash told no stories. So he'd set the fire and mounted Slate and ridden away without looking back. Some things you had to destroy to survive, some bridges you had to burn, or you'd always be tempted to cross back over them. Nalani rode beside him in silence. Her Apache mare, a paint she'd named Sage, moved with the sure-footedness of mountain-bred horses. She'd said goodbye to nothing, had simply left, cut herself free from her tribe, her family, her history, the kind of amputation that either killed you or made you someone new. Jacob understood. He'd done the same 3 years ago when he'd buried Margaret and Lily, and walked away from the settlements, walked away from society, from the rules and expectations and false comforts that couldn't protect the things that mattered. They stopped only when the horses needed rest, slept in shifts, ate jerky and hardtack and whatever they could hunt, spoke little, but the silence between them was full now, not empty, full of understanding, of shared purpose, of something neither of them had named yet, but both felt growing like a seed in hard ground. On the 7th day, they reached a valley Jacob had heard about from trappers years ago. Hidden, tucked between peaks so high they wore snow year-round, with a stream running through it cold and clear, with grass for horses and game in the forests, with space to build something new. "Here," Jacob said. Nalani looked around, saw what he saw: sanctuary, possibility, a place where the past couldn't reach, where they could what? Start over? Could anyone truly start over? Or were they just carrying their ghosts to a new location? She dismounted, walked to the stream, knelt and let the water run over her hands. It was so cold it burned, proof she was alive, proof she could still feel. She looked back at Jacob. "We'll need shelter before winter." He nodded, already scanning the tree line, already planning, already doing what he did, turning possibility into something solid. They spent the next weeks building, not a cabin this time, Something better, something theirs. Jacob taught Nalani how to notch logs, how to pack mud between them for insulation, how to measure twice and cut once, because mistakes out here cost time, and time was something they were always running short on. Nalani taught Jacob which plants were medicine and which were poison, how to read the land the way her people had for generations, how to listen to country instead of just passing through it. They worked sunrise to sunset, their hands blistered, then calloused, then became something harder, capable. They fell into rhythm, the kind partners develop without discussing. She'd start a task and he'd finish it. He'd lift something heavy and she'd wedge it into place. Two people learning to move as one out of necessity, then out of something else. Something that felt dangerously close to what Jacob had lost, what he'd sworn he'd never risk again. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the walls of their new home rising behind them, Nalani spoke. "Tell me about Margaret again." Jacob stiffened. He told her once, the night in the old cabin, but repeating it, felt like opening the wound fresh. "Why?" Nalani fed another stick to the flames. "Because I want to know who you were. Before the grief. Before the—" She gestured vaguely. "Before you became this, the surviving version. I want to know the living version." Jacob was quiet so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then he did, slowly, like each word cost something. "I was softer, not weak, but open. I laughed more, made plans, believed in future. Margaret did that. She had this way of making everything seem possible, like we could build a life out here and it would last. And I believed her, I believed it." He paused. "Lily made me believe it too. Every time she smiled, every time she ran to meet me when I came home, every time she—" His voice cracked, stopped. Nalani waited, patient. Finally, Jacob continued. "After they died, I stopped believing, stopped wanting. It was easier that way. Safer. If you don't want anything, you can't lose it. If you don't love anything, nothing can be taken." He looked at her across the fire. "But then you came, and I started wanting again, started caring, and it terrifies me, because I know how this ends. I know what happens when you let yourself—" "Stop!" Nalani's voice was firm. "You don't know how this ends. You don't know what happens. None of us do. My sister drowned, your family died. Takoda came and we survived. We don't get to know the ending until we're living it. All we get is this moment, this fire, this choice to either build something or spend our lives mourning what we lost. And She met his eyes. "I choose building, even knowing it might fall, even knowing nothing is guaranteed. I choose trying." Jacob stared at her. This woman who'd run from a marriage she didn't want, who'd fought her own people to defend her choice, who'd killed to protect what mattered, who was sitting here now offering him what? Permission to hope again? Permission to try? He didn't know if he could, didn't know if he was capable anymore. But looking at her, at the way the firelight caught in her dark eyes, at the way she'd become essential to his days without him even noticing, he thought maybe. "I'm scared," he admitted. The words felt like betrayal, like weakness, but also like truth. Nalani smiled, small, sad, understanding. "Good," she said. "That means you're alive. That means you still have something to lose. The day you stop being scared is the day you stop caring. And we can't afford that. Not out here. Not with winter coming. Not with everything we're trying to build." She was right. He knew she was right. So he nodded, reached across the fire, took her hand. And they sat there, two broken people, choosing to be broken together rather than alone. Winter came hard that year, snow piling up until the valley became a white bowl between the peaks, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in the bucket overnight, the kind of cold that could kill if you weren't prepared. But they were. The house stood solid, Walls thick, roof tight, chimney drawing clean, firewood stacked high against the north wall, food preserved and stored. They'd learned from last time, from the winter that had taken. This winter would be survived. They spent those long, dark months learning each other, not just in body, though that came too natural and inevitable as seasons changing, but in spirit. Learning how Nalani liked her coffee, how Jacob whistled when he was thinking, how they both woke from nightmares sometimes and needed the other's hand to remember where they were. Learning that Nalani snored slightly and Jacob talked in his sleep. Small things, intimate things, the building blocks of a life shared. Nalani told him stories her grandmother had told her, about Coyote the trickster, about the first people who came from the earth, about the stars and what they meant, and how to read the sky like a book. Jacob told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to track from his father, about the war, the one he'd fought in when he was too young to understand what war cost, about the scars on his back from a Confederate bullet that had nearly killed him. They traded histories like currency, building trust one story at a time. Spring came slowly, snow melting in fits and starts, the streams swelling with runoff, green pushing up through brown, life returning. They'd survived, both of them, together. It felt like victory, small but real. They planted a garden, built a corral for the horses, expanded the house, adding a second room because one wasn't enough anymore. They were building, just like Nalani had said, building something that might fall but was worth building anyway. One morning in early summer, Jacob was checking the traps up the valley when he heard horses. His hand went to his rifle immediately. Old instincts, old fears. But when he looked, it was just a single rider, an old Apache man, alone, unarmed, moving slowly like he wasn't sure of his welcome. Jacob recognized him after a moment, Ahiga, Nalani's father, the elder who'd let them go, who'd stood between them and Takoda's rage, who'd chosen his daughter's freedom over his own pride. Jacob rode down to meet him. They faced each other in the meadow, two men who'd been enemies, who'd pointed guns, who'd drawn lines. But something had changed. Something had shifted. Ahiga looked older than Jacob remembered. The silver in his hair more pronounced, the weight in his shoulders heavier. "I come alone," the elder said. "No warriors, no threat. I come to—" He paused, searched for words. "To see my daughter, to know she lives, to—" He trailed off, but Jacob understood. To make peace with choices that couldn't be unchanged. Jacob studied him, looking for deception, for danger, saw only an old man who'd lost his daughter and wanted to know she was all right. "She's alive," Jacob said quietly. "She's well. She's—" What? Happy? Could he say that? Was happiness even something people like them deserved? "She's at peace," he finished. "More than I've seen her." Ahiga nodded slowly. "Will she see me?" It was a question full of hope and fear in equal measure. The hope of a father. The fear of rejection earned through harsh words and harsher choices. "That's her decision," Jacob said. "Not mine. Come, we'll ask her." They rode back together. Nalani was outside the house, tending the garden. She looked up at the sound of horses, went still when she saw her father. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Ahiga dismounted, walked forward slowly, stopped 10 feet away. "Daughter," he said. Just that. Just her relationship to him. The one thing that couldn't be broken, even when everything else had been. Nalani set down the trowel, straightened. Jacob couldn't see her face, but he saw the tension in her shoulders. The "we are" happening inside her between hurt and love, between anger and longing. Finally she spoke. "Why did you come?" Ahiga spread his hands. To say I was wrong. The marriage contract, the demand you return, the inability to see you as a person instead of a—" He struggled with the word. "A possession. I was wrong, and I—" His voice cracked. I miss my daughter. I miss her voice, her laughter, her spirit, and I wanted to know if there was a way back, not to how things were, but to something new, something where you are free, and I am still your father." Nalani's eyes shone with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You let him come for me. You knew Takoda would come and you let him." Ahiga nodded. "I did. Because I was angry, because my pride was wounded, because I thought honor mattered more than love. But I was wrong. Takoda died because of my pride. Good men died, and you—" He looked at her, really looked, saw the woman she'd become. "You nearly died, and I would have been responsible. I would have been the one who—" He couldn't finish, the weight too great. Silence stretched between them. Then Nalani moved, crossed the distance, and embraced her father. The old warrior's arms came up slowly, carefully, like he was holding something fragile. They stood there, father and daughter, in the middle of a valley far from home, building a bridge across the gulf that had opened between them. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was too simple a word for something this complex. But it was connection. Acknowledgement, the beginning of something that might someday heal. Ahiga stayed 3 days, met Jacob properly, not as enemy but as the man who'd saved his daughter, who'd defended her, who'd given her the freedom to choose. They talked little, men of few words both, but understanding grew anyway, the way it does between people who've both fought for what mattered and lost and won and learned that nothing is ever simple. When Ahiga left, he pressed something into Nalani's hands, a beaded necklace, her grandmother's. "So you remember," he said quietly. "So you know. You will always have a place, always have family, even if the path to it is different now." After he left, Nalani stood holding the necklace for a long time. Jacob came up behind her, didn't speak, just stood there, present. Finally she turned. "Thank you," she said, "for letting him come, for not—" "For not what?" "For not holding the past against him, for giving him a chance to be more than his mistakes." Jacob smiled slightly. "That's all any of us want, isn't it? The chance to be more than our worst moments." She kissed him then, gentle, grateful, loving. And in that kiss was the shape of a future neither had dared imagine 6 months ago. The months became years, 2, then 3. The house expanded, became a proper homestead. They added chickens, a milk cow, a second horse. The garden grew from a small plot to rows that could feed them through winters. They prospered not through wealth, but through sufficiency, through having enough, through building something that lasted. Other people found the valley eventually. A trapper who stayed a winter, a family fleeing persecution back east, a young Apache couple, exiled like Nalani, who needed sanctuary. The valley became a place, a community, small but real. Jacob and Nalani became its unlikely center. The cowboy and the Apache woman who'd chosen each other over everything else, who'd fought for the right to build their own life, who offered that same right to others who came seeking it. They married, not legally, no magistrate out here, but in the way that mattered, before witnesses, before the land, before each other, promising not forever because forever was impossible to promise, but promising today and tomorrow and the day after, one day at a time, building a life. On their 4th anniversary, marked by the first frost, which is when they'd met, they stood on the ridge above the valley, watching the sun set. The house below with smoke curling from its chimney, the corral with horses, the fields going brown for winter, everything they'd built. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Leaving your tribe, your family, everything you knew?" Nalani considered, then shook her head. "I regret the pain it caused, the people who died, the bridges that burned. But this—" She gestured at the valley, at their life. "No, never. I chose freedom, chose you, chose the right to build something on my own terms, and I'd choose it again." Jacob pulled her close, felt the weight of her, the solidness, the realness. 4 years ago he'd been a ghost, a man going through motions waiting to die. Now he was alive, imperfectly, incompletely, still carrying grief that would never fully fade, but alive in ways that mattered. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he admitted. "Never thought I'd want to. Never thought I could." Nalani looked up at him. "And now?" He smiled. The expression still came hard, but it came easier now. "Now I'm grateful for the wolves, for the chance to be more than loss, for you." They stood there as the sun bled out across the western sky, as the cold came creeping in, as the stars began to emerge one by one. Jacob thought about Lily's childhood theory, that stars were souls waiting to be born, waiting for their chance to shine. He dismissed it as whimsy back then, but now he wondered. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe everything was just waiting for its chance, its moment, the chance to become more than potential, to burn bright, to matter. Below them in the valley, lights began to appear in windows. People settling in for the evening, sharing meals, sharing warmth, sharing the simple gift of not being alone. It wasn't paradise. Paradise didn't exist, not in this world. But it was enough, more than enough. It was life, real life, with all its complications and sorrows and unexpected joys. The kind of life worth fighting for, worth defending, worth building one day at a time, even when you didn't know if it would last. And maybe that was the point. Maybe nothing lasted forever. Maybe everything was temporary. Houses and love and even stars eventually burned out. But while they existed, while they shone, they mattered. They meant something. And that was enough. That had to be enough, because it was all anyone ever really had. The moment they were living in, the choice to build or burn, to love or hide, to risk or remain safe and small and untouched. Jacob Morrison had chosen risk, had chosen love, had chosen to be broken open again with all the danger that entailed. And standing there with Nalani in his arms and the valley spread below and the stars emerging overhead, he knew it was the right choice, the only choice, because living in fear of loss meant never truly living at all. And he'd wasted enough years on that, enough time being a ghost. Now he was alive, and he would stay alive, would keep choosing life and love and building until the day he couldn't anymore. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of winter, the promise of snow, the cycle starting again. But cycles were good. Cycles meant continuity, meant seasons turning, meant life persisting even through the hardest times. They walked back down to the house together, to warmth and light and the simple evening rituals that made a life. And as they went, Jacob sent a quiet thought skyward, to Margaret, to Lily, to everyone he'd loved and lost, hoping they knew, hoping they understood, that he hadn't forgotten them, would never forget them, but that he'd found a way to carry them forward, to honor them by living, by choosing hope over despair, by building something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had burned. The door closed behind them. The night deepened, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and in a small valley hidden between mountains, two people who'd been broken separately learned what it meant to be whole together. Not perfect, not unmarked by the past, but whole in the ways that mattered. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. And that's where this chapter ends. But the story of the West never truly does. If you felt the dust, the danger, and the heart in this tale, don't ride off just yet. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And while you're here, check out these other frontier stories waiting for you on this channel. Tales of grit, love, and the wild unknown. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next ride under the wolf moon.